Like, I've been playing these games since 2014. I'm 25. I've known these characters for like half my life, and I don't know shit about them. I feel like the worst friend. Like,
Ladies, gentlemen, and those with the good sense to do away with the whole notion, I welcome you to the premier audio medium for all your Fazbear entertainment needs, the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. Note, FFPP is not responsible for any loss of appetite, disinterest, dismemberment, or other legally classified statuses. So strap in and enjoy.
hello and welcome back to the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast. It is your host with the toast, Fry Toast, here with a very special guest. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is ID's Fantasy. I am a relatively recent addition to the FNAF theorizing community as I just got invested into the franchise as a security breach.
You know what? Valid. I mean, I've been playing the game since FNAF 1, but I've been in the like community around the same time, because I mean that's like when I started getting traction was right around Security Breach as well. So like I feel like Security Breach and its launch kind of started this like almost like a new wave
Renaissance,
of like
sorta.
FNAF, of like a lot of FNAF content creators. And it's been really refreshing to see, because I know being in the fandom for a while, there was really like 4 people I would say that I would watch, and now I mean there's so much content I could watch all day, and I do often.
Nice.
But as far as today's topic, we are going to be going over kind of Remnant, Agony, General Possession, it's kind of the spiritual and scientific side of FNAF, and kind of evidence that we have for how it works, what we think about it, things like that. So why don't you take the floor?
All right. Yeah, it's really interesting. When I was getting into FNAF, one of the main things I was interested in was the concept of Remnant and how FNAF seems to have a pretty unique way. Like, it's not fully unique. It's like you still have spirits with their unfinished business and general possession stuff, but like the concept of Remnant as this like liquid soul metal infused with emotion or whatever, that's a relatively unique thing for FNAF, and I found that very interesting, and so that's like a decent chunk of my investment is like, this is very cool.
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting that like it introduced a way to measure like spiritual phenomena in like a very scientific and calculated way. But
that's
still
really interesting in
very
regards
vague.
to like horror and stuff. It's like a lot of the times like, there are ghosts. They're just there, and like for the first part of the franchise, that's kind of just what it was. It's like, ghosts. There they are again. And then it's like, okay, but there's actually a reason for why they're ghosts, and that reason is also part of why the dude is stabbing the children or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, and you're right, because there are also like 2 different directions it goes in, because we do also still have ghosts, especially even now with stories like Alone Together, right?
Yeah, I was reading that one the other day, and it's like, oh, okay, this is just some kid who's wandering around, and his grandma is also wandering around, but she's like, yeah, this is chill, I just get to visit my friends and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting that it introduces like, yes, there are some ways ghosts will stay no matter what, but also some ghosts just like to stay, you know? Some ghosts just do anyway, which I guess is the explanation that the encyclopedia leaned on for Charlie as well, where it's like, well, she stayed around for other reasons, you know?
And the thing is, like, technically we have known that ghosts can choose to stay for a while. What with the Stitch Wraith Stingers in Fazbear Frights, because Jake could have moved on. He had the opportunity. He just chose not to help Andrew.
Yeah. And then I do think it's interesting with talking about Remnant specifically, where like it seems very cut and dry of like, oh, ghost possess object, ghost controls object to some degree. When we get into Remnant, and we don't really have a lot of hard evidence as far as I'm aware on this, so it's more speculative and kind of loosey-goosey. I wonder how much of the will or like intelligence of the original spirit has any effect over its own remnant.
In what way do you mean?
Like when the way that I've seen Remnant in the story and the way I've seen it used, it seems more like, to me, Remnant is almost implemented as sort of a power source, like just a way to make something more living, but it gets confusing when considering the fact that Remnant comes from an actual person's soul. And sometimes it's 1-to-1. Like I can imagine with like Elizabeth and Baby, there's a lot of Elizabeth there.
Yeah, you've got
But
like
then
there's
with
the remnant and the soul. And then there's some cases where it's
Exactly.
just remnant.
Yeah, and then like with the fun times, where at that point the remnant is multiple souls, possibly anyway.
I'm like, well, you see, I have my entire, what's it called? I could write an entire essay on why I think Molten MCI is a little bit sus.
Oh yeah, no, fair. I think as far as Molten MCI goes, and that's a whole nother 3-hour video
Yeah.
realistically, but I'm currently I think that the toys going into the fun times makes sense, but I could also see a lot of other
Okay.
explanations for that. But regardless,
Yeah.
I think it comes down to the idea of like, because we do have, I mean, you mentioned Stitch Wraith, we do have situations where multiple souls inhabit the same like being.
Yeah, and there's other
Um,
instances in Frights as well. There's a
Yeah.
Together Forever, which I was I
Mm.
was reading that one in the car, and my like 7-year-old sister's like, "Hey, what are you reading?" And I'm just like reading the whole like, yes, the people are splattered all over the inside of this Springlock animatronic. I'm like, I'm
Right.
reading FNAF stuff.
Reading some about bears. They're pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so we already have establishments of like multiple ghosts in one being and how that functions in different ways. I wonder how that translates to Remnant, and if there is any like
Like a
issues
mixing of
with
their
that.
remnant or something.
Yeah, like a mixing of Remnant, or like even like when something is infused with Remnant, how much of the original soul's will is still within that soul.
Yeah.
And
It's
I
making me
just
think
I
of,
don't think we
like-
have a lot of examples of it.
Yeah, because the things like there are some things where it's like with the Charlie bots in the novel trilogy.
Yeah.
Henry's emotions whenever he was building those robots were infused into them, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's full blown remnant, but like I'm pretty sure it's like that, you know, just because like that's
Would that
the way it
not
was
be
shown to
closer to Agony?
it.
If it like, you know what I mean?
I think
I guess
in
it depends
some
when
ways-
he's building it.
Yeah, because the thing is, like, Agony seems in FNAF to be, like, a pretty specific, like, you've got Remnant, which is the general silvery, emotion-infused, potentially soul-infused substance that
Yeah.
can bring, put life into something. And then there's Agony, which is this black ooze that is,
Fair.
like, just Agony.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
So with the Charlie bots, I feel like that would lean more in the direction of Remnant than Agony.
I see
But like,
that.
I do
guess
think there's
you're
overlap
right,
between Remnant and Agony. You know?
for sure. I mean, I think even the games and the encyclopedia seem to be implying that perhaps Agony is Dark Remnant, depending on which book you read.
That's
and
what
which
I've
game
been
you're
going
playing.
off of. Is like, okay, in FNAF AR, you've got the lighter stuff and the darker stuff, and
Right.
Shadow
Like, that feels-
animatronics are Agony potentially. All right.
Shadow Bonnie protects it, like.
So I'm like, I'll take what I can get, I guess.
Yeah, it seems very strange. And we will. One of the questions I picked out does talk about the shadow animatronics, I think.
Heck yeah.
Actually,
I'm gonna be talking about that in my Midnight Motors video.
I'm looking at my question sheet. I think I don't have it, but we can talk about them anyway.
Sounds good.
But yeah, so for Remnant, I think it's a matter of like Remnant we have very clear examples of in the games, especially with like Sister Location, FNAF 6. Whereas with Security Breach, I think there are still, no pun intended, remnants of like that kind of
Freddy seems very
material.
haunted.
He seems weird. There's something up with him.
I was like,
But
yes, I found myself when I cleared the path, and I just sort of sit there like, you found yourself, you say.
I wonder, it's interesting that I feel like more than Remnant, Agony shows up a lot in Security Breach.
Yeah.
And then, so it's interesting that it kind of
think that could
swaps,
be
because I feel like
something to do with
Agony
web
doesn't
robots.
show up a lot in the earlier games, I feel like, as far as we're aware.
Yeah, I think to some degree, Agony is at play because the books emphasize that Agony is like the strongest lingering emotion. So I do
Sure.
think like in the creation of whatever remnant bound the spirits to their animatronics, there was Agony involved. because,
Okay.
murder.
Yeah.
But, like, there was, like, the soul there as well, so it isn't just pure agony.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I know we mentioned we're going to talk about it. We'll just shift there now. One of my theories on Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy for a while, and I still I still feel pretty strong about it. And it could be out of ignorance because I have not finished Fazbear Frights yet, so I don't know everything we know about Agony. But is that Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy not only are agony-based creatures, but they are sort of like I'm going to mix this up. Yin and Yang. Which one is black and white? I think Yin is white. I could be wrong. It's the Yin Yang reflection of Cassidy and Charlie separately.
Interesting.
Where Shadow Freddy would be Cassidy and Shadow Bonnie would be Charlie. Now, why Charlie's would be a rabbit, I have no idea.
Similar. Yeah, that's my thought. I'm looking at... I can get into a little bit of my Midnight Motorist stuff.
Sure.
So I'm looking at it, and it's... the Files calls it later that night. It's raining. I'm pretty sure it's the night of Charlie's death. And then there's the three-toed footprint outside the house. And I'm like, well, that can't be an actual animatronic, therefore, shadow animatronic mayhaps? And if it is the night of Charlie's death, then, like, maybe Shadow Bonnie was created from her death's agony, and it led so-and-so to the location to be like, hey, you need to see this.
Come find me. Now, I guess that could also be the thing that now it could go either way, and I don't want to spoil too much of your theory since, but that could also lean into remember what you saw depending on who the child of Midnight Motorist is.
I do think it's the crying child.
I see your cogs turning and I like where it's going.
And like in Fazbear Frights, Felix, in the Felix the Shark book, in the story You're the Band, which is my favorite because it features Michael. There's an instance of a shadow leading a possessed kid out his window into a Freddy's location. And I'm like, I'll be honest, I didn't get there yet. So I mean, that's a pretty good one. Oh yeah.
That's a pretty good that's a good connection. I do wonder where I love the fervor. God bless. We're in peak FNAF when a Markiplier Let's Play starts misinformation campaign. The Shadow Bonnie in the monitor and Remnant.
Oh right.
I was
like, gosh dang it, Mark.
I loved it. It's so funny because I still get comments about like, oh, but did you consider that Shadow Bonnie's in Ruin? I'm never not going to get this comment.
And then
now.
I promptly decided, right, this is not real.
Right. But it's interesting though, because like, sure, Shadow Bonnie isn't there, but there's a lot of agony around Ruin. Like with like what the like certain animatronics look like, the state of, I would even argue that there's just agony around the location.
And given the amount of death that happens in the books, even if things don't happen identically, even if it's just like close, like that's still like a bunch of people died here. There is going to be agony.
Not to mention, I know there's a couple people in my Discord who were talking about the possibility of Ruin being a prequel, and I thought it was a decent possibility, but one of the main things they were pointing to is it seems clear that, like, sure, the Pizzaplex is constantly under repairs, but, like, pretty recently before Security Breach, something really bad happened. Looking at the underground of Security Breach, where there's a lot of, like, caved-in parking garages and strollers lying around, like, something really bad happened very recently. So that even that could be part of that agony.
Interesting. Yeah.
So general possession is something that I think we have kind of more information of, especially from Alone Together recently.
Yeah. It's like they just give a list of like, okay, here are the signs of being haunted. I'm like, finally an explanation for the FNAF 4 nightmares.
FNAF 4 nightmares, but also I would argue an explanation for most of the hallucinations. In
like
games.
Golden Freddy, the It's Me,
the posters, like
the mini games can even be explained by this. It's their memories.
Could. Yeah.
Anyway, for context, we should probably read the list to the 1. You start to have funny dreams and flashes of memories that are not yours. It's like they possess your thoughts when they're near. 2, you can feel chills or a tingle on your arms or back when they're around, which we cannot measure in game, but whatever.
I catch a vibe. I catch a vibe.
Yeah. 3, there could be sudden movements of objects or sounds out of the blue. 4, if they really attach themselves to you, sometimes you can hear thoughts in your head as if the ghost is talking to you. 5, and if you're really gifted, this is pretty rare, you might even see the ghost with your own eyes. And I'm like, yes, Golden Freddy.
Golden Freddy for sure. And I also like, to an extent, I really feel like Alone Together, and this is kind of my like, I'll die on this hill. I really think Alone Together, and specifically the way that ghosts are helped to find peace, kind of, I think it nearly proves that the puppet did not stuff the bodies into the animatronics, but instead led the ghosts to find their own bodies in those animatronics.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, honestly. I watched your video on that, and I'm like, this is neat.
It was funny. I went to check Reddit, as I often do because I hate myself. I went to check Reddit after I posted that video. And it was funny. Apparently, there's been a debate on the subreddit, specifically on r/FNAF theories, on specifically did the puppet stuff the animatronics or not. So that came out at a great time, but I guess not great for the comments on Reddit because it just added more fuel to the fire. From what I can see, one of the biggest arguments for the puppet doing that is the visuals of the FNAF 2 minigames, where like the puppet's literally putting masks on the kids. And like, I get that.
But the thing is, there is a lot of symbolism in these games.
There's a lot of symbolism. Like, how much of that minigame is literal, and how much is it like that's the best he could do at the time, and it maybe has even changed since originally made in 2014?
Yeah. Because, like, even if the books aren't, like, the novel trilogy aren't game continuity or whatever, like, William in those books stuffed the bodies to hide them. Why wouldn't he do that in the games? It's not like he wanted to be found out.
Specifically with the missing child incident, the bodies are never found.
Exactly.
So, like, where would they have been?
Yeah. It's like, okay, William left them on the floor, and the puppet somehow crammed them into the animatronics. I'm not sure how it would pull that off.
I guess I could see, and it doesn't make sense because I definitely think MCI happened not at the FNAF 2 location. But I guess if you wanted to make the argument that Save Them is the MCI kids, then they are laying around. They're not in the suits. But like, even then, like that would be at a FNAF 2 location. So that
and the toy animatronics are there.
Yeah, no matter what, you have to make some kind of interpretation of those games. Yeah, I think Alone Together really helped add a lot of like
context to possession.
Yeah, context, that's a good way to put it. Context of possession and what the rules of this are.
Yeah, because the thing is, you can sort of figure it out based on the games. Like, oh, well, this probably means you're being haunted. The Golden Freddy's not actually in the office. But, like, this is like, hey, here is signs that a spirit is haunting you. And it's very, like, laid out. That's the thing with the books is, like, a lot of things in the games, it's like, okay, you can piece it together from the games. But having it written down in a story elsewhere helps.
Yeah, here's a couple names and like specific rules on how certain things function, you know.
Yep.
I do see definitely FNAF 1, pretty much all of the hallucinations in there being because of Golden Freddy. And those being hallucinations. That being said, and I think this was brought up on one of the recent podcasts, maybe the last one, I'm not sure. FNAF 3. The Phantoms. Would that also be a hallucination, a spirit, or are we talking more what the game at the time probably intended, losing oxygen and starting to hallucinate?
I think even at the time, like, losing oxygen and hallucinating, but I do think there was the whole spiritual element to it as well.
For sure. I can see that. And like even the guilt of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think, like, with the Fazbear Fright story, I think it's What We Found. The hallucinations the guy in that story experiences are somewhat due to the spiritual stuff in the area.
Yeah.
So I do think even in FNAF 3, the hallucinations are impacted by, like, they have a whole bunch of relics from old Freddy's locations, so it makes sense to me
it's chock full of it.
Elements of those spirits would be present.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I do see that. And then FNAF 4. This is I know you brought it up immediately, and I do agree, but it's interesting that the same book gives us two different answers for FNAF 4.
Which was excellent timing for my Midnight Motorist FNAF 4 video.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I wonder. So I guess without spoiling too much of your video, what do you lean more towards between, I guess, Didophobia and Alone Together? Like, where are you kind of standing with that?
So for Didophobia, I use the mechanical explanation for what the nightmare experiments were.
Sure.
I think the crying child was the one who had them.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rory is just meant to represent that.
Sure.
Twitter's gonna hate me for that one. But like for the way it applies in FNAF 4 itself, I lean to Alone Together because in the FNAF 4 nightmares, you can hear phone guy audio from FNAF 1,
mm-hmm.
and Mike draws Nightmare Fredbear in the logbook. So he would have had to see them.
Mm-hmm.
So, if he's being haunted by his brother, who went through those nightmare experiments, that could explain why we're playing as Mike, playing as the crying child, sort of thing.
I fully agree with Alone Together, and like how you've woven that into FNAF 4. I differ slightly on Didophobia.
Okay.
Part of me thinks that both of them had been put through those experiments.
Okay.
And that's mainly, I don't think it's necessary, but I think it makes a lot of sense with Michael in the aftermath of the Bite of 83 and William's reaction to it. And then also how he would kind of have such a strict control over Michael going into the sister location. That's kind of where I'm at with that. But regardless, I do fully agree with you in the idea of FNAF 4's gameplay is Michael having nightmares either fully or partially influenced by the crying child.
Yeah.
And I think Fredbear and Nightmare, even to an extent, are an extension of that.
Yeah.
Nightmare
being in the so you attached you mentioned that you associate Shadow Freddy with Cassidy, but because of FNAF 4, I somewhat associate Shadow Freddy with the crying child.
Totally fair.
Because you got Nightmare and he's labeled in like Ultimate Custom Night as Shadow Freddy or whatever.
I think where I'm at with that is with so I for now am in the belief that Golden Freddy has both the crying child and Cassidy in it for at least some stretch of time.
Yeah.
So my thinking with it is if they're already in such a close proximity and we see in the
does it really matter?
True, but
like if they're in such there's probably some overlap there.
Yeah. That's why I think it's a matter of like I think FNAF 4 we see Michael having nightmares of his experiences in the chamber, and then Crying Child reaching out, and that's where we get Nightmare Fredbear. And he didn't mean to make it Nightmare Fredbear, but that's just what happened.
That's just what it was.
And then with Crying Child there, Cassidy comes in, and then it turns into Nightmare.
Ah, okay. Interesting.
And I think I'm there mainly because of the logbook where like the three of them almost have a dynamic.
Chatting. Yeah.
So I for real, I would love like a very story-based game of just Michael going through with the logbook, just like a reimagining of like FNAF 1 through like I guess 3, 4, like whatever the stretch of the logbook would be.
Yeah.
Just I would love to see that because there's a lot of missing information and characterization around
FNAF 1, but
when that logbook was filled.
FNAF 1, but it's actually 6-hour nights, so you actually have downtime, and then you have to doodle in the logbook to pass the time. Exactly. Or like I saw this amazing there's been a fan artist that's been making like little comics on how they'd survive, and one of them was just like I love those.
Immediately puts Bluey in front of the animatronics and like I'll let you watch cartoons, just don't kill me. I love that comic. And just do that, and then for the next 6 hours work in your logbook to like help your like kid brother.
Yes. Oh man.
But yeah, I think it's interesting. And then someone did raise a good point with the puppet, and I was like, so in the video I argued that like Alone Together is telling us the puppet led the ghosts to their bodies so they could find peace. And someone did raise a good point that if they found peace, why is FNAF 1 happening?
Yeah. I actually had a thought on that.
Shoot.
I think that when the spirit, so in Alone Together, when what's his name again? When the kid Travis, yeah. When Travis finds his body, what happens is he remembers everything.
Yeah.
He remembers who he was, what happened to him. And I think, and the thing is, like, he was able to be at peace because he didn't have any other unfinished business after remembering who he was. Meanwhile, the kids were murdered.
Yeah,
and when they remember that, they're going to be very angry and not at peace. They're themselves again. So this is where I put in, like, I think that this is what the put back together potentially refers to in the games, is helping a spirit put themselves back together as themselves.
Not to mention, I mean, in the Silver Eyes, to help the kids remember, he literally had to put a like puzzle of a picture back together
and remind them of what happened to them.
No, that's a really good point. I had just been operating on like, oh yeah, I mean they found peace, but they still didn't like William. No, that's a great like line of thought of, it doesn't necessarily help them find peace. It helps them remember who they are, remember who they were, and remember what happened. And if they can then find peace because of that, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes them out of the fog of whatever they were before then.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And that would make a lot of sense to then create these like FNAF 1 scenarios where it's like, okay, well now we're just pissed.
Yeah. It's like, oh, that's what happened. I don't like that.
Yeah, for real. And then you also and then that would also explain why they historically in the franchise have not been violent to kids. Because it's not like we're not just violent, angry, crazy remnant agony beasts. We just are really mad at this one dude, and it's hard to see it through these masks, I guess.
Something like that, yeah. And well, again, in the Fazbear Fright story I referred to earlier that you haven't read, you're in the band.
Yeah.
Sorry to spoil this for you, but the kid Timmy, he basically gets possessed by one of the missing kids after putting on the Freddy head from one of the
I think I remember
right?
like hearing about this. Yeah,
and he's fine with his mom. But there's one point where his grandpa picks up a knife to cut steak or something, and the kid freaks out and tackles his grandpa to the ground, and is like, "Oh no, don't hurt Timmy," or whatever. I actually have that. Yeah. I have this bit pulled up in my lore folder. And what Timmy says after being calmed down is, I just saw the knife and I had to protect the others. So
it's
I
like
think
almost like a compulsion.
Yeah. So I think it's a case where they view certain people as threats based on like the way they act and stuff.
I could see
the
that
situation, because like.
Yeah, I mean, we see that with the Silver Eyes too, because like the wearing the mask, kind of all that, but also like once, I guess, Book Michael is like, they're chill with the calm down. Then they're like, they are like, oh yeah, you guys are fine. Okay, gotcha. Thanks, Mike. Like, so no, that tracks, and I think we even see that in some of the trailers for the upcoming movie, where like obviously like they very clearly are fine with Abby. And I wonder if they're only really aggressive towards Mike in trying to take Abby away from them.
Exactly.
And then that also sets up why there's vandalizers in the movie, to kind of trick the audience of like, oh, they'll kill anyone that enters, but like realistically,
like, no, they were,
you came in and you started breaking my stuff.
It's like if someone came into your house and started throwing your food on the floor, you would be kind of upset too.
Exactly. No, I think that's a really good point. And kind of leans into the will of these characters. And then I guess I had a thought. I swear I did. and it's just gone.
That's
Um,
iffy sometimes.
so I guess we can also talk about so kind of circling back to Remnant, right?
Mhm.
With these spirits having such almost like personalities, realistically, like they have the will, the intelligence somewhat behind it. When it comes to Remnant, kind of again, and I don't know if we have any like hard evidence of this. It would just have to be like observed. Maybe we see that in Molten Freddy. I wonder how much of it carries over through becoming Remnant and being injected into something else.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we have any evidence of that. I think it's something that we've yet to really get clear examples of.
Yeah, because we see various instances of people and stuff getting injected with Remnant. You've got Carlton, there's Eleanor, there's probably some others. I don't know. William was doing something.
William was
Mike
injecting everything. Yeah.
So people have been injected with Remnant. It's just like maybe that with the injection of the Remnant, it gives like just increased sensitivity to spirits.
I could see that. And that it kind of also tracks with traditional lore and thinking around possession and spirits, where like objects nearby a ghost will be just like inherently possessed because of it. So maybe putting that spiritual energy into something will just inherently make it maybe easier to possess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that we really just don't have information on. At least not enough information to like make clear decisions on.
And I want to say this just got me thinking. There's this with the Stitch Wraith bits. This is only like sort of related. But what I find really interesting is that Jake is able to sort of manipulate I assume he's like manipulating his Remnant into doing things. He's able to sense like intentions, it seems. He's able to like detect negative and positive spiritual energy. If he touches someone, he can influence their like pull memories to the surface.
Which we do even see kind of similar things mentioned in Alone Together. Like that seems to be a continuing thing.
Yeah. And I just think it's very interesting. It's like, yeah, Remnant is the whole like, yes, we're putting life into this thing, but it also seems to have other uses in terms of like accessing old memories or being able to detect evil presences and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a matter of, it's like almost like a not only a power source but a tool in and of itself. That is really interesting. I wonder if that's going to be brought up, especially with the scooper we see at the end of Ruin. Yes. Is that a scooper in the traditional sense, aka will that inject Remnant? Like, are we getting
that doesn't look like much of a scooping scooper so much as a stabbing scooper.
That straight up looks like just a big needle.
It's like that's not scooping anything out of anything. However, if we go off of, what the intended actual purpose of the scooper was, other than, the
scooping.
They're scooping as in scoop, and then they're scooping as in the acronym.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, especially like, now I know this is going to get hot waters, especially with the idea of the mimic being related in any way to the Fun Times or with Baby or anything like that. The scooper being so close is, I think it's a decent additional piece of like supporting evidence for that, or at least like more a matter of like, it's interesting to say the least.
Yeah, and it seems like, and with Help Wanted 2 being sister location focused, it seems.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting in terms of like analyzing the current story and stuff.
Now, Help Wanted 2 has me. I'm calling my shot. I really think we're getting a Help Wanted 2 trailer on Halloween. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a spooky day. Comes out less than a week after the FNAF movie, where there's already a lot of hype. Yeah. And I feel like Steel Wool has been ramping up to something coming up.
That's fair. And like they said it was coming out this year, and we've only got like 2 months left. So
yeah, we've got one teaser of an elevator shot. And granted, they showed off some games at PAX, but that's not really like a trailer.
Yeah.
No.
It's like I'm here for the lore, not the games. Other people are here for both, but I'm just here for the lore.
And still will, again, I say this every time. Please, dear God, do a simultaneous release on Steam. I want to be able to play this game, and I'm not dropping $1,000 to do it.
Yep.
We'll see. I feel like they will, but it's weird that there hasn't been any announcement of that yet. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine the PSVR 2 is so much more advanced than any other VR that it can't be like ran on anything else.
Yeah.
But
Like
Hellbound 2 also
one
does.
complication thing with the VR games is that like not everyone can play them, and so the lore doesn't get found.
Exactly. Yeah, like one of the biggest tools in this community is how voracious the whole community is with these games. And if it's
when everyone's throwing themselves at the game, at least like 5 people will find it.
Yeah.
And at least
and it's
one
like
of them will
on
put it
complete
online.
accident. Like I remember I found a grant. I'm sure somebody else found it first, but I remember before I saw it online with UCN, I found the whole like Old Man Consequences Easter egg, and I only found that because as a player I'm a little baby and I only turned on Old Man Consequences. So
I feel that.
So it came out like things like that. Like you need a whole community just doing weird stuff to find these things. And not only you're right, not only VR, but especially one specific VR on a console. Like that's going to limit so much of this community's access to it. So we'll see. I really hope it's simultaneous release, or at least like give us a flat mode. I'll settle. Like,
fingers crossed.
What are your, before we move on to questions? Now that since we're on the topic, what do you have any like, I guess predictions or takes for Help Wanted 2 while we're on the subject?
My current guess is that it's going to be we're playing as Cassie's dad before the events of Ruin. So, like, explaining why he went missing, and also potentially setting up the Scooper, M.X.E.S, and the Mimic.
I could see that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I feel I like that. I've heard some people say when we first heard about it, my very first take was, "Oh, this is Gregory's Help Wanted." But after Ruin, I've kind of changed my tune.
Yeah.
I think that interpretation is really likely. I'm kind of leaning on, because of Didophobia, like, and this book being released so soon before Help Wanted 2.
Yeah.
Part of me is wondering if Help Wanted 2 is going to be someone going to either the FNAF 4, FNAF 5, or FNAF 6 location to get things for the first Help Wanted. And whatever they see there could be influenced by like Nightmare Gas or any number of things creating those mini games. I don't know. It's super up in the air. This is one of the, like, I feel like with before in the series, like when we got a trailer or a teaser, it's like, okay, I think I kind of know where this is going. I have no idea where Help Wanted 2 is going, gameplay or lore.
That was me with Ruin. Like, I don't know. I'm just thinking, like, ghosts, probably.
Yeah. No, with Ruin, it was interesting that, like, one of the biggest debates I saw was, is it a prequel or a sequel? Knowing how often the Pizzaplex kind of goes to shit and comes back. No, but I guess we're approaching the 40-minute mark, so I feel like now's, I guess, a good time to move on to questions. So I've got a few. If some of these go by really quick, maybe we'll take a quick breather and I'll grab another one. But I feel like these will probably go on for a while. And they're actually somewhat similar. So, or somewhat related. So I think that's pretty good. I guess we'll start actually with the last one I grabbed because it's the most relevant to what we were just talking about. So this question is from Echo, she, they. Thank you for your question. Since Moon was revealed to be present in Help Wanted 2, are there any other characters from Security Breach or FNAF in general that you would like to see return in that game? Thank you for your question, Echo. I mean, there's a lot of characters in Security Breach I'd love to see, but the one character I will always say that I want to see again, and I don't even know, Help Wanted is like the only series that I think we could at this point, is Ennard. I think Ennard has been criminally underutilized every single time.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I don't know.
I do think also DJ Music Man could make for a very good
Man,
level.
I miss Music Man. He wasn't there in
Yeah.
Remnant, it made me sad.
I'm sure maybe it was like just a scope thing, but we were robbed of a giant ruined DJ Music Man. That could have been so
he wouldn't even have
dope.
to do anything. He just could have been a set piece. Just
For
let us know he
real,
was
just
there.
have him crawl around in the background.
You're like, where'd he go?
It's such an easy design to just take off all of his hands, so it's just the spindly little legs, and then like mess up his face, and there you go. He's creepy now. He was already kind of creepy just because he was big.
Big spider boy.
I think those are probably my top two for like, I would love to see a really good implementation in Help Wanted 2.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it'd be, I don't know.
It's there's a lot of characters, right? And like, we have to assume that like every main security breach character is probably going to be in there.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see some hints of Charlie, since I'm pretty sure she's still around in some way.
Okay.
I mean, especially with the post-it room being labeled Charlie door, the mask on the blob, stuff. It's like, okay, where's she at?
Super fair. I wonder if it has to do with the VR game, because something I've been noticing with the Nightmare Own plush, the description in Ruin was it's that thing from the old VR game.
Yeah.
Which that's a fair point that like to the general public, that was the first time that was ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
So that is interesting that like, is this representative of Charlie and VR at that point?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for it. That's, I guess, the summary of what do you want in Help Wanted 2? Everything and more.
Yeah.
Let's go to a more lore-focused question. This is from Jacob, he, him. Thank you for your question. Something that I and this is something that I personally, not forgot, but wanted to forget. At the end of Security Breach, one of the endings was the fire escape ending.
Ah, yes, I like this one.
Do you think that Vanny and Vanessa are two separate people, or do you think they're the same one? What's up with the fire escape ending? So I do still think they're the same person. But it's a good point. What the hell is up with the fire escape ending?
Yeah. I am currently of the opinion that they are separate individuals.
Okay.
Partially because they're very similar, but there are differences in like Vanny and Vanessa have different voice actors, and they voice the characters differently, even if you account for like voice modulation. Vanny's voice is much higher. Even in Help Wanted, where she once again had a different voice actor, so if we want to account for the voice modulation there, Vanny's voice in Help Wanted is like it's voiced higher and is more similar to Vanny, and Vanessa's voice is lower. Additionally, there's when Vanessa locks Gregory in Lost and Found, the switch from Vanessa to Vanny on the computer screens was instantaneous, which I find a little suspicious. What else was there? There are the various connections between Vanessa and Elizabeth. Like, Vanessa's like, oh yeah, like, there's in the therapy session, it's like, Vanessa's like, oh yeah, he said he would always be watching, and the therapist is like, are you talking about your dad? Is that still a problem? And she's like, no, he's locked away in my mind or whatever. And I'm like, that's a little interesting.
To me, sorry, I'll let you finish.
Sorry, I was, and then with the fire escape ending, I don't personally think it makes sense for that to just be Vanessa's ghost. Like, Vanny falls off the building, presumably is dead.
Right.
My thoughts would be if
she's definitely a robot. Like, if she lives that, she is a robot.
My thought is Vanessa's the robot.
Okay.
So my thought process is Vanny, Vanessa. So like, so my thought process is Vanny is Vanessa from Help Wanted, and from AR. But between AR and Security Breach, she was replaced with the Vanessa robot. Because in AR, one thing that's like sort of shown is that she's acting very suspiciously.
Sure. Like the whole
and
rubber
drawing a lot
mask
of
thing,
attention.
she's being weird, yeah.
Yeah. So my thought process, but then there's one point in Help Wanted where it's when you get the Vanny mask, and you hear Vanny say something along the lines of like how she made her costume and how no one suspects anything. But the thing is, if you listen to Vanessa's therapy tapes in Security Breach, people are suspecting something because they're sending her messages and stuff to the therapist. Yeah. So my thought was, what if what no one suspects is that Vanny was replaced with Vanessa, who I think would be possessed by Elizabeth, who we know from Sister Location has good skill with pretending.
So,
and that could explain all the Elizabeth connections on that end.
So a few things. I mean, I will say
it makes more sense when I have it like written out in the script and stuff.
Oh, for sure. No, that's the thing about this podcast is like train of thought is very difficult. But I'm not knocking that. I think that's a very good theory. I like a lot of I think that's like that. It's very interesting. I've never heard that angle of it. I typically when I've heard there's two different people, I've only heard that Vanny was the robot. So the idea that Vanessa was the replacement so that Vanny could go do Vanny things is actually really interesting to me.
Yep, that's basically the thought process. And the thing is, like, Vanessa knows what Vanny is up to as well. It's not like
For sure.
People are like, oh yeah, Vanessa just doesn't remember. Like, no, she does. We know from the therapy sessions that, like, she is well aware of Vanny and Glitch Trap and what's going on.
It's one of the more compelling separate people theories I've heard. So I'm of the camp that they're the same person. I am of the camp of like Vanny and Vanessa, same person, split mind, Glitch Trap just controls part of her, yada yada yada. Like the traditional explanation there. I like the idea that one of them was a robot specifically created by the original to go do the other thing. I would argue that B7-2 almost implies that Vanny would be the robot.
Okay.
Only because the idea of like the new personality taking on a robotic form.
That's fair. My thing is just
but that's also just one like interpretation. So
yeah, with B7-2, like if it was more direct, like GGY, then I would potentially go with that. But I do with B7-2, I think it's I took it more as just here is an interesting sort of situation, and I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like talking about B7
it could
that
also
much
be a case of like role reversal, because with the Stitch Wraith, back to the Stitch Wraith, I view that as like a role reversed parallel to the Crying Child and Cassidy, where with the Crying Child and Cassidy, it seems like Cassidy's the one primarily in control, because where with the Crying Child more in the background, because, and I'm also referring to like being able to observe the environment, because the altered text says stuff like I can't see. But with the Stitch Wraith, Andrew, the vengeful spirit, is the one who can't see, is limited in what he can do, and Jake, who died through so Jake died of a
more natural
head tumor. Brain tumor.
More natural than Andrew.
Yeah. He was the one in main control. And the way I sort of view that is like Cassidy and Andrew are the parallels. And then Cece and what's his name again? Jake, yes. Are sort of parallels, but like with the Stitch Wraith, their activity levels were sort of reversed.
I see that. And I will say
if B7-2 is meant to represent Vanny, I think it could be a similar situation there, because I do think that if one of them is a robot, I think it's Vanessa.
I can see that. I will say that would give a better explanation for Vanessa staying on top of the building. Because the thing that always rubbed me the wrong way about two separate people is, why would the human Vanessa be like, well, I guess I'll die up here. But if she's a robot, then like she doesn't have a purpose anymore. Her creator just splatted. No, I will say that explains that pretty well. I still am of the opinion. I think Alone Together would be my touchstone for this now. For the fire escape ending in that what if scenario, I think Vanessa and all of her unfinished business remains at the Pizzaplex, and immediately her ghost has her memories because she sees her body on the floor down all the way down there.
Yeah, my thought there would be like, why would she show up right where the fire escape lets out?
That is fair. Why it's strange why she's still on the roof.
Yeah, because like theoretically, the spirit would show up in a place that's relevant to the person. And so my thought would be either she shows up by her body or she shows up by Princess Quest. Because most people, when they're arguing this is Vanessa's spirit, they're like, it's to say, hey, her spirit's still trapped because you haven't beaten Princess Quest. And I'm like, well, if that was the case, why show that as in this way? Why not show her by the Princess Quest games? Why hide this information behind the post-credit scene of an ending that's harder to figure out how to get than the Princess Quest ending? Because Princess Quest is pretty obvious how you get it.
Yeah, and I also would argue that Princess Quest doesn't really interact with her soul in any way. Instead, it's what's trapping her mind.
Yeah, I feel like that's just a case of, glitch trap is I think that's like glitch trap's access point to the Pizzaplex.
I also think, too, for a matter, that the Vanny persona exists post Princess Quest.
Definitely.
Like the idea of like
Princess Quest was beaten.
Yeah, like it
which
is
I'm
removed
still on
from
the
Vanessa.
fence about.
Fair, and I do understand that. I do think that in some way Princess Quest has been beaten pre-Ruin. Whether or not it's the ending or they go back and do it or something like that.
Yeah,
weird stuff like that happens.
My two possibilities that I think happened is that both the Burn Trap ending and the Princess Quest ending happened, or elements thereof. Or every single one of the comics happened and it was a hallucination situation from Gregory due to having been glitch trapped at some point in time, and that he was only able to break out of it after doing the Burn Trap ending.
No, I did. I saw there were 5 nights at Security Breach. I really like that. I think that's a very interesting interpretation. I think a good point towards that is the fact that they're numbered, but not in the way that we find them or in a way that makes sense for Security Breach. But they are numbered. That's weird. I think right now where I'm at is Princess Quest ending happens, and then Gregory, someone who states that he cares about the missing children, and Vanessa, someone who knows about that, go back and do Burn Trap. That's where I'm at. But regardless, if the Princess Quest machine is beaten, I do feel like the Vanny persona doesn't like dissolve, but instead is just removed from Vanessa and perhaps put in the Vanny mask, maybe. I don't know. But
I wouldn't be surprised if Cassie was going to be the new Vanny or something.
Exactly. Like it's put somewhere to then be put into somewhere else later.
Yeah.
And maybe to your point, if Help Wanted 2 is Cassie's dad, maybe eventually goes into Cassie's dad and he sets up a lot of what we see in Ruin.
Yeah, I think that's possible.
I think that's super likely. So I guess we kind of went all over on there, but it's Vanny and Vanessa. That's a big question. Jacob, thank you for your question. We'll move on to we've got one really long one. That is another big. We'll do this quick one. We'll save the quick one for the end because that'll be a nice place to end it. So we'll move on to Moro, they, them. Thank you for your question. Not sure how I feel about this theory, but it's something that plays in my mind. If Gregory is connected to the crying child, robot, thematic, or otherwise, was he simply rebuilding the familiar surroundings of his childhood home as part of him regaining his memories? An example, Michael's room in Security Breach. The lamp in Michael's room and sister location is the same lamp that appears in the corridors outside the FNAF 4 bedroom. So in my mind, I've always had the connection that Michael's room is part of the Afton house, possibly just the living room. The detail I find so interesting about Michael's room and Security Breach is that Freddy and Friends on Tour cartoon is playing specifically. Could this be a reference to or recreation of Fredbear and Friends show we see in the FNAF 4 living room in the minigames? Maro, thank you for your mini theory question. That's a really interesting take. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. So back to my whole Gregory hallucination theory.
Sure.
So one thing I suggested in that video is that with the AR world and the Vanny mask, Cassie sees things from her subconscious. Including missing posters of Gregory and stuff, and her memories of her party at Freddy's or whatever, right? So one thought I had was if Gregory is in order to see Michael's room, you have to flash the Faz cam at a wall, which reveals a tiny door. Logically, this would not have been built in this way.
Yeah.
So my thought was potentially this was a manifestation of Gregory's memories, because in this room you also have the therapy tapes, which we know Gregory is associated with as patient 46.
Right.
It has the wall code, which seems to tie directly back to Gregory with the flash, duck, run, shoot, crawl, whatever, crush the vial band.
Yeah, that whole thing. Yeah.
So and then with all the Gregory crying child connections with his design, the Freddy Popsicle, whatever the post-it room is potentially, I think it's possible that that Michael's sister location room is a sort of manifestation of Gregory's subconscious.
Almost like a mind palace kind of area.
Yeah.
Not necessarily real, but somewhere he goes to almost.
Yeah, exactly.
I could see that. I wonder, hold on, something that's going to bother me until I look it up.
Exotic butters.
The duffel bag message right outside that kind of gives you the hint. Torn paper. This is the hint for the door. It is there. You can't see. Alone in the dark. I found the key. That I feel like would support your theory on that, because that to me very much feels like, oh, there's this part of your mind that you can find by yourself, like focusing. Because alone in the dark, something you can't see, you'll find. Like to me, that feels like meditation almost.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's a really interesting way to interpret that room. I'm of two minds. Sorry, go on.
So I was talking about how you can't find the retro CDs until you have Freddy with Roxy's eyes, and logically, the CDs of Gregory and Vanessa's therapy should not be lying around the Pizzaplex.
Fair.
And you take them to a room that should be impossible.
That is fair. I guess that would come down to, for the CDs specifically, I feel like that comes down to a question that we always have in this goddamn franchise of like, is it literal? Is it literal or is it gameplay? And I don't know, because that's a great point. Because the fact that you're taking something that shouldn't exist into a room that shouldn't exist, that does feel important. To me, I feel like I'm of two minds. Because on one hand, it almost feels like if we're thinking that FNAF 6 location, and I'm at least thinking that FNAF 6 location and sister location are super close together. Mainly because
location-wise?
So, location-wise.
Okay. I was going to say timeline-wise that does not work.
No. Location-wise. Like the idea that the sister location bunker was connected to Fredbear's, which eventually becomes part of FNAF 6.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm still loose on this one, and I got some heat for it.
Okay.
But if we have the FNAF 4 Nightmare Chambers that are a series of linked rooms that don't have a very clear escape to them, and we know Henry went there, part of me is wondering if the chambers that he built for FNAF 6 are just those chambers but modified to serve his purpose. If that is true, which it might not be, very likely is not true, but if that is true, that would put the FNAF 4 house and FNAF 6 very close together locationally. So there was always this one, and I don't think
like the Pizzaplex just sort of absorbed the house.
Literally built on top of it, and then just some of the stuff shifted into it. Like I can't, because like it's so strange.
That's a
it's
funny
either
idea.
That,
I'm just not sure how possible that would be.
Yeah, it's either that or we see like 3 or 4 rooms from Help Wanted recreated in the Pizzaplex. So I do wonder if maybe this is just either Glitch Trap or the Mimic or some kind of, I need to recreate what I've seen, and just doing that. Those rooms that are ripped from Help Wanted, they're not 1-to-1. You could argue that maybe those Help Wanted rooms were inspired by the Pizzaplex rooms, if like depending on the timeline there. But because you're right. If it's real, if Mike's room is a real room, it doesn't make sense. So so trying to explain it in a way that makes it a real room, I have not found one that does make sense. So the idea that it's more of a manifestation from Gregory's mind, I think there's a lot of valid points to that theory. That's really interesting. So in that, I do have to probe you then. In that scenario, how exactly is Gregory connected to the crying child?
All right. So, I do
Twitter, get ready.
I've done videos on this. They'll live.
Fair.
I do think that, like, he was potentially, that he, at some point in time, got the crying child's spirit. Because we've got Charlie somewhere in relation to the post-it note room with Charlie door. We have Cassidy, presumably, in Princess Quest. So where's the crying child?
Fair. I mean,
I don't think the crying child would have. I don't think the crying child moved on. Partially because of the Stitch Wraith, you have Jake staying around to help Andrew figure out his whole deal.
That's fair.
And at this and at this point, we have their potential. I have anyway potential spots for most of the kids.
Sure.
Like I think Vanessa's linked to Elizabeth. Charlie is in some way connected to the post-it room, as is Gregory in certain interpretations.
Sure.
And then Cassidy is in Princess Quest, presumably. So,
yeah.
I think with Gregory having all the crying child connections, he might not... Oh, yeah, and then, the post-it note room. You've got the Afton family staff bot table with,
Yeah.
So that's a little, okay. There is an Afton doing something.
For sure.
And I think Gregory would make sense for that.
I think that makes sense. For me, with the silo specifically, the post-it note room, it's one of those things where like it so
that
obviously
could also be a hallucination related thing.
True. It so obviously to me screams the Mimic, but logically he would never have been in there.
Yeah. I personally can't see the Mimic as being involved with it.
Yeah, what I think right now is that's kind of the, I guess you could call it the Vanny testing chamber, where whenever Glitchtrap gets a new, like, mind slave, they're put in there until they're ready.
It works for me. I don't know
which would have Gregory in there. And I don't know, but I can't think of any other reason for it.
There's the "This is my home, leave" post-it note, which does lead me to think that's not quite what's going on there.
Fair. Yeah, it's one of those things where like that's not a perfect solution, but it's such an odd
something
room
to start from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I if we're already making Twitter mad.
Oh yeah.
So the Mimic. so the Mimic, right?
Pizzaplex before FNAF 3.
Who do you think built it? Because I'm of the opinion right now, I think our most likely candidate is Henry.
I think it's either Edwin or Henry, depending on how involved Edwin is in the game timeline.
I can agree with that. Like if Edwin's in the games, for sure he built the Mimic. I think it's one of those two.
Yeah. I wanted Tails to be game canon so bad, but I'm not willing to say the Pizzaplex was built before FNAF 3 happened. It's
so strange. That and for me, if Tails is games canon, there is such a huge gap between Book 8 and Security Breach. So much has to happen between there.
Yeah.
So I'm of the opinion that it's parallels, but I know Reddit more so than Twitter will be mad at me for that one. But I guess we can go on to kind of our last question. Bit more lighthearted. Good way to end it. After we just got us both. After we both ruined both of our DMs right there.
Oh yeah.
This question. Oh, so Moro, thank you for your question. This question is from Kenny. Him. If there was anything you would want to add to or expand on in the FNAF story, what and why? Thank you for your question, Kenny. So I got to, as the the person who goes through my email to get these questions. I've been thinking about this, so I'll give you a little time to think, because it's a very out there question. So I'll give you some time to think about that.
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
If there was anything you'd want to add to or expand on in the FNAF story, what and why? For me, now my cop-out would always be Ennard, because I just think he's such wasted opportunity. But as far as, like, for me personally, I think the thing I would want expanded on the most is the creation of the Pizzaplex and what went on in, like, how this building got greenlit. Because there's a lot of like early timeline stuff that I would love more details about, but we can make a lot of really good guesses to the early timeline.
Yeah.
The timeline between FNAF 6 and the beginning of Help Wanted Security Breach, there's not a lot to go on.
Yep. It's just
So
like
I
at
would
some
love
point
something
Fazbear
there.
came back, got popular again, made a VR game, apparently, built a Pizzaplex, several if Tails is anything to go off of.
Yeah. And like, there's just so many questions in that part that we have nothing to go off of. So I would say that or Glamrock Foxy. Those are my two. Because like, I mean, I made a whole video that was essentially just like, dog, I don't know why you guys keep asking me. We don't know anything.
Yeah.
So I guess what's something that you would want added to or expanded on in the FNAF story?
I would like it if, like, the early timeline characters got their stories expanded, like, and explained to some degree. Not in the sense of, like, I want Scott to just give us the lore, but in the sense of, like, I like character-driven stuff. And
For sure.
it's like, we have all these characters. We have William, we have the Crying Child, we have Elizabeth, we have Mike, we have Phone Guy, whatever. But we don't, like, get them doing much. So when we get, like, any scrap of... It's hard to figure out how what their motivations would be when we don't have a ton to go off of. We do have a decent amount from the novels in regards to William, Henry, and Elizabeth.
And Charlie,
but
too.
like that
Yeah.
Charlie isn't even Charlie technically.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
And stuff like that.
It's really evident in the fandom of how much of a craving there is for like good characterization of any of these characters. Like Mike's doodles is the most we've gotten out of the main character of this franchise ever. And there's like 6 of them in the logbook. Like
Yeah.
No, that's a super valid point of like, just who are these people? Not, and you're right, not what they do, not where they come from. Who are they? What do they like?
With Mike, one thing that kind of bothers me, I guess, is people look at his behavior in FNAF 4 and just kind of assume bullying his brother was his entire personality, when I highly doubt that's the actual case.
Yeah.
Like, I think that in Midnight Motorist, the person on the couch, I think that's Mike. And everyone's like, oh, but he was bullying his brother. Why would he defend his brother? Like, why would he tell his dad to lay off his brother or whatever? And I'm sitting there like, as the older sister of 2 younger brothers of that approximate age, this makes complete sense, I assure you.
Yeah, no, I totally see it. I'm of the opinion Midnight Motorist is the person on the couch misses after, and the person who runs away is Michael. But
that's fair.
I wouldn't argue that the couch person isn't Michael because he like bullies his brother. Like that's not a good argument
I hear, and I'm like, characters aren't just one note. He can pick on his brother and still love his brother.
For sure. Especially like with how little we see in those mini games. All we see is he jumps out with a mask and that the Crying Child hates it. Okay, what happens immediately after that? Like, we never get to see that or anything like that.
And we're only shown the worst pieces, and then like at the end of the mini games, Mike feels terrible. He didn't mean to kill his brother.
And you could even argue the majority of what he does in FNAF is to atone for that.
Exactly.
Like, there's a lot to it, and also because we know so little about the motivations of these characters, I've seen a couple people argue that up until Sister Location, Mike is almost William's accomplice. which,
Yeah.
to be fair, there's evidence for, because we don't know Mike.
Exactly. Like, I remember I made a short suggesting that as a possibility, because he does go to sister location under his dad's orders. I didn't necessarily say it was like a full-blown accomplice situation.
Sure.
But he was sort of accomplishing by doing what his dad said. And then there's
he was
like
at
the
least
Candy
listening
Cadet
to
stuff
his
with the
dad.
kitten story, where he like, I think the kitten story is Michael and sister location, where the boy turns a blind eye as the snake eats a kitten.
Yeah.
And after 5 days, he feels guilty and goes back and fixes the problem. So I think it's, like, the thing is, we just don't know. And, like, maybe this is about Michael. We don't know. I can't, like, definitively say, yes, I'm going to use this to characterize him, like, definitively, because you can't. And, like, the movie's going to be nice, but it's still not Michael. It's a different one.
Yeah, no, that's Mike Schmidt. That's Josh Hutcherson, for as far as I'm aware. Like,
Exactly.
I'm so, at this point, I'm so certain, and I could be dead wrong, I'm so certain that if there is any lore to be gotten from the movie, it's just to say that FNAF 1 the game takes place after Freddy's closes down. That's it. If that. I don't see us getting any more lore than that for the game.
Yeah, and even then, like, the situation with the movie Freddy's might be different than the game, because this could just be, like, conveniently like this for the sake of, like, having things broken, and then it, like, you can break things without causing problems.
Exactly. No, totally agree with that. And it's like, there's so many, like, just about Mike specifically too, of just, he's such an important character to the series, and I feel like he's like the 5th most known about, like the 5th character of amount of information we have for them. Because I'd probably put like William up top, then like, honestly, if we're just talking about the games, probably William, then Henry, then Elizabeth, then the crying child, then Michael. Like,
we know some stuff
like
about Gregory and Vanessa as well. We
that's fair. No, I kind of forgot
about
them.
them and Cassie than we do about Mike. Mike's like somewhere near the bottom, slightly above Phone Guy.
I would argue, honestly,
maybe
totally
Phone Guy more.
On Security Breach. I totally blanked on Security Breach. Gregory, Vanessa, William, Cassie, maybe Cassie, William. Then the rest of the list, then Phone Guy, then Michael. You're totally right.
The only one we know less about than Michael is Phone Dude.
Yeah, agreed. Except we probably know that he's not a very good businessman. I think that's a great point. Characterization would be huge. And even if, like, lore aside, because of course, characterization, we can use that to make better guesses on the lore. But even without the lore, it'd be nice to know these. I feel like I've known
as a
Michael
fan fiction
for half
author,
my
I
life.
would appreciate it if I could properly characterize this man.
Like, I've been playing these games since 2014. I'm 25. I've known these characters for like half my life, and I don't know shit about them. I feel like the worst friend. But no, that's a good point. And I guess that's probably where we'll end it. So, thank you so much for coming on. Do you have any upcoming projects you'd like to shout out? Anything like that?
After the Midnight Motorist video, I'm doing a timeline video. So,
hey, excited for that. I feel like there's going to be a couple timelines coming out kind of soon. I'm really excited to see everyone's interpretations for it.
Yeah, part of the reason I'm doing the Midnight Motorist video is so that I can get all my Midnight Motorist thoughts. Just, okay, here they are. If you have, and then in the timeline video, be like, here's what I think. If you have problems, go watch the longer one. I already went over it. I don't have time to do this again.
The game's only timeline I did last December. Now, granted, I don't agree with a lot of the stuff in there because I think you need the books for a lot of the assumptions to make. But it was so nice to make the 4th video. It was the best video to make because that was the one where anytime I said anything, I went, if you have a question, go watch this one.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go over anything again. It was great.
Timeline video is just gonna be like, so back in the 80s, there was this dude named William and his business partner, Henry. William had some screws loose. That kind of thing.
Bada bing, bada boom. Yeah. So links in the description. Make sure to keep an eye out for that. Thank you all again for being here. If you have any questions or theories that you want discussed on the podcast or any potential collabs, anything like that, you can read it out to Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast at gmail.com. That is also in the description because it is a pain to type. This podcast is on YouTube, YouTube Music, Apple Music, iTunes, Spotify, and nowhere else because I'm lazy. But other than that, thank you for watching the Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, where the pizza abilities are endless. We hope you enjoy your future patronage. Bye-bye for now.